So a bit of history. So friends, we're coming up to the 10th of Shvat. It's 75 years from 1950. English date was January 28, 1950, when the previous Rebbe Shabbos morning passed away at 8 o'clock in the morning. So the bit of background. The previous Rebbe, towards the end of his life, suffering from MS and partly paralyzed as a result of the beatings he endured at the hand of the communists during his arrest in Soviet Russia in 1927. So he could hardly speak. Very difficult to hear him speak. He still did have yechidus, but there was one of the secretaries present that could understand, that would tell.
What was the name of the secretary at that point?
That would have been Chaim Lieberman or Shmuel Levitten. Shmuel Levitten, that's the Zayda of my sons-in-law. At any rate, so he instructed, the previous Rebbe instructed our Rebbe as follows. The previous Rebbe had established the main organizations, which we won't go into now, but that defined Chabad. And one of them is Kahos, which is the Chabad publishing house. Stands for Karnei Hod Torah, the rays of the glory of Torah. Kahos is also one of the clans, this is the intent here, one of the Levitical clans, which Kohanim are a part of, you're a branch of, Aaron is a descendant of, that carried the ark when the Jews traveled in the desert. So the ark contains the Torah, so the publishing house is called Kahot. And you all know the symbol of it. This is the symbol of Kahos, this is the official above it. It's the biggest Jewish publishing house in the world. The Rebbe was in charge, and it's basically to publish Hasidic writings of the Rebbe's. That's basically its mandate, although it went beyond that. The first English books for children, etc., back in the 40s. They remain classics till this day. So the Rebbe instructed that, now we don't know exactly what went on behind closed doors, who chose this, but it seems, superficially, the previous Rebbe instructed the Rebbe as follows. He said like this: Shabbos is the yahrzeit of my Baba, the Rebbe and Rivka. She passed away in Russia. And Tuesday, that week, is the yahrzeit of his mother. She's buried in New York. You walk out of the oil, she's right there. There's 3 women buried there. The Chaim Mushke, the Rebbe's wife, and then the previous Rebbe's wife and the previous Rebbe's mother, all there next to each other. So her yahrzeit is the 13th of Tishrei. So the previous Rebbe instructed our Rebbe, he wants to publish a maimer in honor of the yahrzeit of his mother and grandmother. This was a maimer that he said years earlier, in 1933. And fascinatingly, in Riga, that was the first time that our Rebbe had come to meet his future father-in-law. This was not he became his future father-in-law. 1923. 1923 became his father. 1927, 1923 in Riga. So, and he says to him like this: we don't know exactly, but it has 20 chapters, and you're going to publish it piecemeal between now and Pesach, Purim. Okay. So the Rebbe prints it, and the first installment, it's a booklet that looks something like this, appears on the tables on 770 Friday night, and will be sent by mail to the Chabad centers around the world, which were on one hand you could count. And this is 1950.
This was the night before?
He passed away the next morning. Okay. The next morning, they come Friday night, they come to Shul. Where? See, I'm going to show you. Yeah. So, and it turns out, it's the whole thing, that he's publishing a discourse for his own passing. Turns out that this maimer that he said back in 1923, this is what he's showed, and they continue to publish posthumously per his instruction the next installments. It's a total of 20 chapters. That's the total. Now, incredibly, it turns out that this Maimer is a clear statement about his own passing and the next generation. Why so? Because the Maimer begins with the words like this, like every Maimer begins with a quote from Tanakh somewhere. It's from Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, the metaphor between our love, our relationship with Hashem, the metaphor between a bride and groom, man and woman, husband and wife. So the verse reads, Basi legani achaisi kala. This is chapter. It's the first verse of chapter 5. The words begin, I've come to my God, my sister, the bride. It's a metaphor. What's it talking about? So the Medrash says, he's speaking. The Medrash notes, doesn't say I've come to the garden, I come to my garden. What's the difference? If I say I've come to the garden the first time, if you say my garden, it's yours. You're returning. You have association with this place. In fact, it's yours. And now you've come back. The Medrash says, indeed, that's what this pasuk is talking about. Namely, the outset of creation, God is manifest on earth. But then there were 7 sinful generations. We can list them, but I want to just give a general overview. It started with Adam and Eve, and then their children, 7, one after the other, all the way to the sinful generation, the time of, in Egypt, the time of Avraham. That's number 7. And the Torah, the stories are there in the Torah. Each generation pushed back, as it were, the divine presence away from the world. So the first generation pushed it to the 7th heaven, because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then all the way to the first heaven. We all know the expression 7 heavens. This is really the origin of it, is this Medrash, which is also quoted elsewhere by our sages. And then there arose 7 tzaddikim. Avram, the first one, then Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kahos, Amram, and then Moishe, number 7, right? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kahos, Amram, Moishe. I think I missed one before. And successively brought the Shekhinah back heaven by heaven till Moishe was the 7th, says the previous Rebbe in the discourse, quoting from another source, and puts in brackets, and 7th are beloved. It's not so relevant to hit that, but he wants to underscore that, and brought the Shekhinah back to earth through the building of the Mishkan primarily, the home for God. And that's astounding because the previous Rebbe is generation number 6. And here the whole theme at the get-go is about the whole mission of generation number 7. So there are 7 generations, the beginning of our history, Avraham till Moishe. And then, as we know the principle, the beginning is wedged in the end. We're going to say tonight, Friday night, in L'chadoidi. Shabbos comes at the end, but it's really uppermost. It's also the 7th day. It's one of the 7th of the beloved. It's all tied in. In Moishe Mashiach, it's called the Erev of the Great Shabbos. It's the 7th day. So we are at the end of history. The same 7 kind of mirrored again. But this time, as the Rebbe points out, the mission is to bring the Shekhinah down to earth forever. Built on all of the work that was done and all the generations that precede us. So it's astounding that this discourse is this about transition from 6 to 7, but there are more things as well. We pointed them out in the past, but it's worth just refreshing our memory. Then I want to get into really the bottom line. This is a photocopy, friends, of the original front cover of the discourse of the pamphlet that appeared in 770 Friday night. The next morning, 8 o'clock, he passes away. And this was sent out. People have it all over the world to study as per the instructions. You can see his name, Yosef Yitzchak, Shlita. Now, this little box over here, it's too hard for you to see, but you guys can see it, is the inside cover. And it's written by our Rebbe. He's the publisher, he's like the editor. And he says he's publishing this per the instructions of his father-in-law because of the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's Baba and the Rebbe's mother. But there's a printing error, ostensibly. The word Shlita, I underlined this, you can see, which means may my father-in-law live. Leyomim, days, toivim, good. It's a word we use for any like rabbi, prestigious person. The yud's missing. And it was noticed Friday night. It turns out, providentially, yud stands for 10. This is the 10th of Shvat. So when he passes away, yud stands for days, yomim. The physical days were over. So like that's an amazing, in retrospect, Gival, this never happened in the history. There should be such a printing error.
When do they notice that?
Huh?
When do they
Some
notice
people noticed it Friday night. They opened it up and looked. Most people didn't, read it quickly. But you hear the story, it's all recorded, that there was a bit of a buzz, a printing error. Next morning, it became clear. And the more amazing thing is this. This gets into, you got to see this like this. Then this is a photocopy of the first page of the original discourse. Yeah, there's a word. There's two things underlined. Before I tell you what it is, I got to point it out. The previous Rebbe's in my modern discourses, he does not mention the sources in the text. As it's written, it doesn't say where, quotes from all over. And actually, not only him, this father also didn't, many of the Rebbe's didn't. Our Rebbe's editor at the bottom would point out sources which were not common that the reader wouldn't know, but just basic quoted sources it doesn't say. So here's the puzzling thing. You can see it's underlined. So the Maimah begins with a quote from the Shir HaShirim. I've come to my God, my sister, the bride. And then he says, the Medrash Rabbah, it says in the Medrash Rabbah. Medrash Rabbah is a commentary on the entire, virtually almost the entire scripture. And then he adds in brackets, Bim Koimai, on its place, and I've underlined it. Meaning to say, which commentary? The commentary on Shir HaShirim. It's called Shir HaShirim Rabbah, the commentary of the Medrash. So first of all, where else is the commentary going to be if not on the verse? Why is he saying that? And why give a source? And the source is so obvious, and he doesn't give sources. Clearly, the previous step is telling the reader, I want you to take the trouble, look up the source in its place, do some research. And you'll see, understand why I'm telling you, look there. Little bit of research reveals like this. This commentary that explains this verse, that it means there were the 7 generations that pushed away the Shekhinah. Now God says, I've come to my God, I'm coming back. And it refers to the 7th generation, appears in 2 places in the Medrash. The identical explanation. The 7 sins, the 7 tzaddikim, with one difference. The way it appears in the Medrash here it is. There's a photocopy of it. The Medrash on Parshas Nosai, which is not in its place. The author of it, I've underlined it, is Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel said this teaching. Beautiful. Who's the author of the teaching Bim Koimai? I want you to see the one on Shir HaShirim, not as it appears in Parshas Nosai. I've underlined it. It's mind-boggling. The author is Omer Rabbi Menachem Chasnei. Rabbi Menachem, his son-in-law, said, Bas Yilagane, boom. I don't know there's anywhere else in the entire Torah there's someone called Rabbi Menachem, his son-in-law. A clear indication to the next generation. He has 2 sons-in-law. What do I mean? Look it up, boys, in case you didn't know. Bim Koimai. Look up there and you'll see that the author of the 7th generation teaching is his son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem. Mind-blowing. So that's what's that first 20 chapter discourse. The more is the marching orders, it's the previous Rebbe's legacy for the next generation. Now, this is what happens. Now, the deep dive will begin a little bit. So far, the historical background. Now, you also know something else. For the first year, the Rebbe resisted accepting the title Rebbe. Didn't put on a kapota. And, if you're asking for a blessing, you would say, okay, I'm going to the oil, I'll take it for you. He's actually always continued that as well. But the title Rebbe, he refused to accept. He verbrengt with Chassidim, but he wouldn't sit at the table with the Chassidim, like any verbrengen. He worked round the clock to continue the work of the previous Rebbe, guiding, answering questions, expanding Chabad. It's still embryonic. Morocco just began. Australia was still in its embryonic stage, guiding letters to Moishe and so on. You can see the Rebbe worked round the clock, as like the previous Rebbe's right-hand man as he was. But the Rebbe, no. There was a lot of pressure on him. Just one cute little story. The Rabbi Yossel Weinberg, famous chassid, a Polish, became a chassid as a bocher in Warsaw, Dvotsk, before the war. Anyway, so this Rabbi Weinberg, a very famous fellow, he used to give on the radio, Matzai Shabbos, a Tanya Shir for years in Yiddish, which forms the basis in New York radio of the Tanya translated in Yiddish, which the Rebbe edited, and that's the basis of all subsequent translations. The Rebbe edited every word's precise, and it opened up, answered questions, beautiful. Anyway, he was a big chassid. And so, the Rebbe kept on saying, he tells that he didn't get instructions. He didn't get instructions from Friedrich Rebbe. That's one of his, he get a lot of excuses. This was one of them. So Rabbi Weinberg says, you know what? Okay. All right. So he takes a group of chassidim. They go to the oil of the Friedrich Rebbe, and they say, Rebbe, your son-in-law says he didn't give instructions. So if instructions are needed, please give him. They didn't tell him that he's going. They just went to the oil. He said, after he went, the Rebbe dropped that excuse. There were other excuses, but that one was no longer. The end was, they say it was the Rebbe. The Rebbe said to him, how could you let my father-in-law, the Chassidim, lead you? Okay, but good. I give one more cute story. They put an ad in the paper, the Chassidim, the big Jewish newspaper of New York, about the first anniversary. That it's the anniversary where the Rebbe calling him Rebbe is, and it's the official coronation. What they used is going to lead the Fabrengen. He was going to lead, that's for sure. He did the whole time. The Rebbe called them in and told them they have to publish a retraction. So as I forgot, it was one clever chassid said, no. He says, we're saying this, not you. We're saying you're our Rebbe. It's going in as is. The Rebbe smiled and dropped it. He says, retraction? We're not retracting this. You're our Rebbe. We're publishing it. The Rebbe's not publishing it. We are. Anyway, it still wasn't clear. It was all vague. There were hints. Then came the first anniversary Fabrengen. The Rebbe is speaking. It's beautiful. And at one point, the chassid gets up. Rabbi Duba from England, this elder chassid, has grandchildren, shluchim all over the world. And he says, the Fabrengen is very nice. We want to hear a maimer. Only a Rebbe says a maimer. A maimer is a chassidic discourse. You have to see it. You can watch it on the video. It's a whole transformation physically, and it's pure chassidus. Only a Rebbe says. You want to hear a maimer? Chassidim want a maimer. Chassidim need a Rebbe. The Rebbe looked at him. And then shortly thereafter, at 10:40 at night, the Rebbe starts a little introduction. You can hear it on the tape. He starts like this. The Rebbe, referring to the previous Rebbe, writes in the Maimer which he gave out for his own passing, then his voice chokes. And he starts then, the melody, the whole the Rebbe saying in Maimer. Moidetik. Big simcha. Now that first Maimer, here's what we're going to get to. That first Maimer was an elaboration of chapter 1 of the 20-chapter original Maimer. Then he said many Maimorim in the course of that year. Now the next year, the anniversary, he says, and the Maimer of the Yud Shvat Fabrengen is again Bosi Lagani, but now he focuses on chapter 2. And so it went till 1970. This is from 1951 to 1970. Every Yud Shvat Fabrengen had one or two Maimorim, sometimes Bosi Lagani, focusing on the chapter corresponding to that year. And then in 1971, began the cycle again. So do the arithmetic. It's a 20-chapter Maimer. It begins 1950. So we are now in the fourth cycle. 15 chapters is 2025. 15 chapters into the fourth cycle. So the whole Chabad, all over, is learning. The focus is chapter 15, because the Rebbe made this pattern, right, of the previous Rebbe's Maimer, and most importantly, what the Rebbe said on chapter 15. When did he address chapter 15? He addressed it the first 15 years, and then 20 years later. So 1965, and then 1985. 1965 from 1950, and then 1985, 20 years later, will be, and that's what this is. They published the Basi Lagani of Chafei 65 and Memhe 1985. It's extremely deep what this chapter talks about, which we're going to talk about next week because we're running out of time, but I want to add something else. I mentioned in passing, maybe in the past you've also heard this, the number 11. The previous Rebbe, I'll show you a picture. I actually have a picture. The previous Rebbe, before he passed away, he didn't, inexplicably, and someone asked our Rebbe, and he said, I don't know why. In his signatures, the last month before he passed away, Yosef Yitzchak, you look at the Yud of Yitzchak, he made it, filled it out, and colored it in. Yud. In the letters he wrote to people, the Yud. He passes away on Yud Shvat. The number 10, his name is Yosef Yitzchak. Yud is associated with the previous Rebbe. Our Rebbe is associated with number 11. He's born on the 11th of Nisan, Yud Aleph Nisan. Now, we should also point out, Yud Aleph Nisan is a big day in our history. How do we know this? Because in the book of Joshua, we are told then that the Jews crossed the Jordan on the 10th. So the 10th of Nisan is desert, Israel, Golus, Geula. The 11th, full day of home. That's the Rebbe's mission, to bring redemption permanently. So he's born on the 11th of Nisan. When did he accept the formal mantle of leadership? The 11th hour was 10:40 at night. Of the 11th day, because the Farbrengen is the 10th at night, was already the 11th night. The 11th month, Shvat is the 11th month. The 11th year, 5711. The Rebbetzin passes away the 22nd of Shvat years later, which is 11 times 2. And he spoke about that, the number 11 again. Why? What's a deeper meaning? 10 represents the perfection of Hashem's divine attributes. There are 10. The 10. 11 is the crown, Keser. Chassidim say crown heights. That's why divine providence. Because when Mashiach comes, will be revealed God's crown. God's crown means God's infinite, which we're going to explore, beyond the system, beyond the attributes of revelation. That's redemption. When Hashem's Keser is revealed on earth, quite literally, God is coronated as king on earth, coronation, the crown. Symbolically, when the king assumes the crown, he's king. He will assume the crown here on earth. That's all the number 11, the Keter, the crown, which sits atop Chochmah bin Dadas and the 7 attributes, which are the 10, the crown on top. So therefore, the Rebbe, the 7th generation, which can bring the Shekhinah down here, the association is also very powerfully with the number 11. Again, now I'm not just going to conclude like this. We're going to explain next week like this. Need this background very quickly. There are many battles that the kingdom will have. Threats, minor expansion, and so on. These are limited battles. But there's one battle where there are no limits and all stops are pulled. When it's the very survival, identity, raison d'etre of the state. When that's the battle, then the king will pull back all stops. The treasures that he amassed personally, that no one ever saw, and the treasures of his forefathers that no one ever saw, that's how precious they are. He will squander them, spend them, do whatever is needed to get what the foot soldier on the ground needs to achieve victory. And he'll even put his own life on the line. That's when it comes to the battle, the ultimate battle for the whole identity and essence of the kingdom. So the Rebbe says, this is what the previous Rebbe speaks about. And so this treasure, now putting it all together, our generation is the final battle. We've gone through lots of battles in our history. This is the final one to bring redemption. In order to do so, collect individually, each one of us, and collectively have been given the treasure that no generation before us received. The Oitzer. The Oitzer Shalamayla, the heavenly treasure that no one ever saw. And that's what chapter 15 focuses on. So deeply what this treasure is, and that, God willing, we will explain next week. And it is so empowering, so breathtakingly uplifting, knowing, and you'll appreciate it when we explain it. You'll recognize, yes, that we have a treasure, a hidden treasure, you and I, this generation, that no one ever had to achieve the final victory and bring redemption personally and collectively. And you'll be able to see this in your personal life. You'll see it on the world stage in Israel for sure, poised at the center of the world, the focus of the world, to end the exile and bring redemption. We'll see what that treasure is. And we all have it, given to the king. The words of the discourse says, the king says, give it to them without limits. Bizbus, like squander, no calculations. Throw it all out, spend it, exhaust it, meaning to say, give it to them. And we all have the entire treasure. That will explain, God willing, next week.